Good afternoon and welcome to our virtual event on the successes of the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative. We are thrilled you have joined us. At this time, I'd like to introduce our host, Brett Shaffer. Brett serves as the Heritage Foundation's J. Kingham Senior Research Fellow in International Regulatory Affairs. Brett?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today at the Heritage Foundation. Before we begin, I want to go over a few housekeeping notes. The session is recorded and will be emailed to you and posted on the Heritage website within 48 hours. All attendees are in listen-only mode at the moment and will be through the program. Today's event will be a conversation in two parts. First, the panelists and I will discuss what each agency is doing to build on the success of the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, the W-GDP Initiative. We will conclude our event this afternoon with audience Q&A. You can submit your questions in the chat box. If you want me to ask your question, please let me know your name and what organization you're affiliated with. I'm honored today to be joined by such a distinguished lineup of panelists. First, I want to invite Ambassador Kelly Curry to turn on her webcam and join me on screen. Ambassador Curry is the Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues at the U.S. Department of State and was appointed to this position by President Trump in December 2019. Prior to her appointment, she led the State Department's Office of Global Criminal Justice and served under Ambassador Nikki Haley as America's representative to the United Nations Economic and Social Council. Ambassador Curry, thank you so much for being here. Really pleased that you could join us here today. For those in the audience who may not be familiar with the W-GDP Initiative, would you mind giving us a quick overview of its origins, the purpose, the accomplishments over the past year?
Sure. Thank you so much, Brett. And thank you to the Heritage Foundation for hosting us here today. We're really grateful for this opportunity to share some information about the Trump administration's efforts to empower women around the world, including through the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, WGDP. I really also want to give a shout out to my girlfriends and co-panelists, Michelle Beckering, Charity Wallace, Laura Smith. We just have such a great team, and we all work together so well on this this cross-government initiative. It's an initiative that covers 10 agencies and departments here in the U.S. government. So it requires a lot of coordination, but we seem to manage to do it pretty well. I think it's a credit to the team that we have leading these different agencies and leading their work on this. Yesterday, I was really honored to participate in a WGDP event here hosted by Deputy Secretary Vegan that laid out and launched our 10 agency implementation plans under Pillar 3. So WGDP has 3 pillars that it works across. Women's training and workforce training and skills building, and women's entrepreneurship, and the enabling environment for entrepreneurship and women's economic participation. And we were rolling out our Pillar 3 plans yesterday. We had a great all-star panel together with Deputy Secretary Vegan. We had Advisor to President Trump there, and also National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien joined us, and Deputy Administrator Bonnie Glick from USAID was there as well. So it was really great to be able to roll out our 10 action plans yesterday about how we're planning to address the legal and regulatory barriers that women face around the world. And this is a really fundamental element. The enabling environment obviously is critical to the success of the other pillars because it allows women to engage in entrepreneurial activity. It allows women to have access to capital. It's the foundation on which women's economic empowerment is built. And a lot of the restrictions that we're working on are things that we take for granted here in the United States. Ability to access institutions, ability to travel freely, ability to inherit property on the same basis as men, ability to work in the same jobs and sectors as men, and the ability to have access to institutions. So we're really excited about how all 10 agencies and departments of the United States government have set goals for themselves to work on this legal and policy reform initiative. So just going back to the basics of WGDP, as you know, it was launched last year by President Trump, and in 2019 in February through a national security presidential memorandum. So it's part of our our regulatory framework now in the executive branch. And it has the 3 pillars I mentioned: the women prospering in the workforce, and that's focused on training and skills building, and women succeeding as entrepreneurs. This is the entrepreneurship, access to capital aspect, and then the enabling, women enabled in the economy. So we have, through the first year, we've reached 12 million women toward our goal of 50 million women by the year 2025. It's a pretty huge goal, but we are on track to meet it, and we're really excited about the progress we continue to make. And we are working really hard through this project to make sure that we're increasing opportunities for women for their full and free participation in the economy. And we're partnering with governments, the private sector, and local communities and women's organizations to help bring women off the sidelines and ensure that they can serve as drivers of economic growth and prosperity in their communities and countries, and including the economic recovery from the COVID pandemic. The key for us, as I said, is this enabling environment and removing these regulatory, legal, and other barriers that are keeping women off on the sidelines and out of the economy. Recently, back in February, the White House Council of Economic Advisors issued a report that found that $7.7 trillion in new GDP growth could be created if we worked in those 5 categories alone and removed the barriers to entry for women. And that is huge. And so when we go in and talk to countries about cooperating with us on WGDP, this is a major data point for us. And we're saying, you're holding your economy and your country back by continuing to have these laws on the books that don't allow women to fully participate in your economy. And while it's the right thing to do, we're also making sure to argue that it's the smart thing to do. And by doing this, we help build partners, both economically and otherwise, who are stronger and better partners for the United States, and that contributes back to our own piece of prosperity. I want to give you one example that we're really excited about. In Jordan, we've been supporting a program through the Middle East Partnership Initiative, MEPI, that has been working to help support a local activist who on her own had already launched a campaign to change Jordan's restrictive laws. Jordan has one of the lowest female workforce participation rates in the region, which is unusual. If you've ever been to Jordan, you know it's a fairly open society in the Middle East, and has a pretty robust economy. But women were still having very low workforce participation rates. And so this lawyer in Jordan, her name is Mayada Abu Jabbar, and she formed a coalition of other lawyers and other women's organizations and helped launch a social media campaign and public campaign to get the government there to change the laws. We provided some technical assistance and support for her organizing work, but this was all done by Jordanian women and their supporters in Jordan to really push the government to change the laws. So we're really excited about this grassroots approach that also then we complement through our diplomatic engagement with countries and the work that we're doing at the senior levels. And so we're going to continue to work with women like Mayada and looking at in places as diverse as Cote d'Ivoire, South Africa, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Afghanistan, Pakistan, just to name a few of the places where we're really focused on driving home this message about removing these restrictions and getting women off the sidelines. We're really also focused on the impact that we're having and how we're measuring it. And that's really important as well. And we're really especially excited about the private sector's role in this. And just another one of our good examples, we work with Freeport-McMoRan, which is headquartered in Arizona here in the United States. And they had helped to develop a entrepreneurship training module that they worked with the university, with Arizona State University, and they are providing this module free to thousands of women. And it's called the Academy of Women Entrepreneurs. And we took this module working with these partners, with ASU and with Freeport-McMoRan, and have translated it into other languages. We just translated it into Portuguese, and it's now being rolled out across Lusophone countries. And we've had it translated into Spanish, and we're looking to translate it into other languages. And it's one of these great programs that has come up through the WGDP umbrella. It's a cooperation inside the State Department. It's cooperation with the private sector, and it's just emblematic of the kinds of initiatives that we're doing and trying to leverage private sector support for what we're doing. So we know, all the studies show that when women have equal opportunities, there's no limit to what they can do and how much they can help contribute to their societies. So we will continue to partner with the countries that want to work with us on this and help them to exploit that potential and really take advantage of it for their own economic benefit. So I think that I'll just stop there, and I feel like I've gone on almost too long, but I'm going to let you talk to some of my other panelists about the great work that their agencies are doing, because they're such great partners.
Well, I do have a few questions for you before we move on to panelists.
Sure.
The first is, I thought it was interesting the example you gave, and I was actually going to ask you for an example as well, so I'm glad you anticipated my question. But it almost sounds like what you're doing with this program is to sort of capitalize or to give a boost up to efforts that are already existing. It's not like you're trying to start from scratch in places. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, this program builds on decades of work that the United States has done to help support women and help them advance economically, and also on the work and the lessons that we've learned here domestically as well. And we know what works here in the United States to help support women. And so we have a great example that we can share with other countries, but they have to be interested and willing to do this. It's not something that you can force on them. They have to see the benefits themselves. And then we're here with open arms, ready with lots of tools and lots of programs and capabilities to help support them when they're ready to make this jump.
Great. That's great, because it's always better to build on something that's already somewhat successful than to try and create it whole cloth from scratch. I was curious, you mentioned that there are 10 different agencies that are working on this as a joint project, a joint responsibility. What role does your office play in coordinating all of those different agencies?
Well, we are kind of the chief cat herder over here, I like to say. It's a real honor, actually, that the Office of Global Women's Issues, which I had, we've established within the office a WGDP unit, and that's staffed to help manage the coordination. We were designated by the interagency as the lead coordinator for this. And we have such, as I said before, such tremendous partners that it's actually pretty easy, because everybody is really competing to do a great job. And so it's not like I'm having to go around and try to pull people in or get them to do this. There's so much enthusiasm across all the agencies and across all of our partners that it's just, a lot of it is just making sure that we're aligned with policy, and that it is aligned with our overall policy and our overall foreign policy, and that we are coordinating our diplomatic engagement with our programs, and that we're using all of the tools at our disposal, both bilateral and multilateral. So there's a lot of those kinds of just overarching coordination, while we're also doing some programs ourselves.
Yeah, it's also this isn't the only initiative in the administration. You also have another big initiative in the administration, the Women, Peace, Security Implementation Plans. So how does all this fit together? You've got two big women initiatives going on simultaneously, and I imagine they have to be complementary, at least at some point.
Well, that's kind of my job, is to make sure that we are coordinating these two and making them complementary, these two big pieces of work that we have. And these are the priorities that the White House has set for our office. I'm really fortunate in a way that I have incredibly strong White House support for these two major policy initiatives, and that we have great legal and both legislative and policy tools coming from the White House to help us implement these two big agendas. They are mutually reinforcing, and so we do find that in some of the countries where we're working, that we prioritize for WPS, that we're also prioritized for WGDP, and we're also making sure that we are taking advantage of the synergies where they do come up. But it's amazing the number of places where we'll start out talking to them about WGDP and very quickly move into WPS, and it's and vice versa. There's a lot of mutual reinforcement across these two pillars, because these are the issues that really affect the lives of women in the developing world most profoundly.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for providing an overview of the W-GDP initiative so that people that aren't necessarily familiar with it kind of got an idea of where this is coming from and what it is all about. I know, it's always tough to be the first person to lay the groundwork like that, and I appreciate it. So thank you coming on, and we look forward to having you join us again on screen for the audience Q&A at the end of the program.
Okay.
Thanks. Next, I want to invite Assistant Administrator Michelle Beckering to turn on her webcam and join me on screen. Hi, Michelle. Michelle Beckering was sworn in as an Assistant Administrator of the Bureau of Economic Growth, Education and Environment, the E3, on January 6, 2020. Prior to joining USAID in 2017, she served at the International Republican Institute, IRI, from 2005 to 2017, where she provided leadership to democracy, rights, and government's initiatives in Washington, D.C. And she also served as the IRI Residential Country Director in Indonesia. Michelle, thank you so much for coming with us or joining us today to speak virtually, unfortunately. We'd love to have everybody in person, but can't do that. But now that we've just heard from Ambassador Curry about what the State Department is doing to advance the objectives of the W-GDP initiative, could you go over what USAID is doing and how their role is distinctive from what the State Department is doing in her office?
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you, Brett, for inviting me to speak today and to share the stage with such an incredible group of leaders with whom I'm really proud to serve in this administration. And as you mentioned, I have a background in democracy, rights, and governance, and this topic just could not be more important to me personally. I spent about half of my career focused on women's empowerment and equality initiatives, and so it's really a moment of pride for me to be able to champion the White House led W-GDP initiative. Really proud of the efforts of the White House in this regard, and just the strong interagency collaboration you're seeing around this topic. So then, and I really do want to recognize advisor to the President, Ivanka Trump. She really was the leader in launching W-GDP, and it's really due to her steadfast commitment that we ensure that women's economic empowerment remains a top administration priority. And to that end, I've got to, of course, recognize my colleague Ambassador Curry and Secretary Pompeo, who continue to prioritize women's economic empowerment in all of our U.S. foreign policy initiatives, and that's really important. So I'm going to talk a little bit about specifically USAID's role in WGDP. And so let me start with talking about the fund. So many of you may have heard of the WGDP fund. This is now in its second year, and really this is important because we operationalize the fund, and it totals about $200 million. And I like to say that through this fund, we're really making the promise of WGDP real, right? Through this fund, we have already to date been able to partner with more than 450 partners from the private sector, from NGOs, from local organizations, as well as governments across more than 60 countries around the world. And this is important, right? Because this is an area that needs, it needs a large group of stakeholders, right? If we're going to meet our objectives, if we're going to meet our goals, if we're going to make sure this is sustainable, we need to make sure that all of the stakeholders are included. And it's really important to us at USAID because, we have championed this idea that really the purpose of foreign aid should be ending the need for its very existence, right? So we have really focused our model of foreign assistance on helping our partner countries advance on their own journeys to self-reliance and seeing ourselves as partners in that journey. And to that point, I want to recognize Heritage here. We've actually used the Heritage Foundations and Index of Economic Freedom in our own journey to self-reliance roadmaps, right? So through these roadmaps, we're really assessing countries' commitment and their capacity to taking the necessary steps to advancing their economies, and specifically to ensuring that they're including women. Acting Administrator Barsa often says, we can't have global prosperity if we are actively excluding 1/2 of the world's workforce. And that's really why it's so important to us to focus on, our role in WGDP. Before I get into sort of details on what we're specifically doing under Pillar 3, I really do want to sort of paint the picture of what we're talking about. So if you look across the world today, there are still roughly 100 countries worldwide that have jobs that are reserved solely for men. So women cannot access or achieve these jobs. Those restrictions alone affect more than 2.5 billion women from equal opportunities in the workforce. And while I would say through initiatives, this challenge, we're meeting this challenge and it's improving. If we looked at the current rates of reform, it would take more than 50 years to reach legal equality. And frankly, that's just 50 years too long. So what we're looking at USAID is really how we can implement Pillar 3, right? So changing the restrictions that women have on work, on travel, on how they access finance, and most importantly, on their rights under the law. And we recognize that this really takes a comprehensive approach, as I said. But one of the things that I have learned in a long history of working on these issues is that passing laws or changing laws is not enough. We have found time and time again that a good legal environment can be thwarted when those laws are simply ignored or not implemented. And that's why through our Pillar 3 action plan, we've really emphasized that it's not only passing laws, it's really promoting new behaviors, because we need to have that behavioral change in order to make sure that the intent of those laws are carried out. And we've already gotten started already to date on this effort. We've looked at regulatory reform, and we look at Pillar 3. Let me mention this. We look at Pillar 3 as really intersectional across all 3 pillars, right? So WGDP has 3 pillars of how we are enabling women's economic empowerment. Pillar 3 is foundational across all of those pillars, right? So for instance, if we want to talk about Pillar 2, which is women being able to access more finance, specifically we talk about women entrepreneurs. We recognize they're not going to be able to do that unless the regulatory environment allows them to do that. So for instance, property rights. This is something so fundamental to what we're doing. Recognizing that most loans across the world are backed by mortgage securities, we need to ensure that women have not only the ability to have a legal lease on their land, but that they're able to actually manage their own property. We also recognize, going to the stat I alluded to earlier, that if we want women to have increased opportunities in the formal economy, we need to actually make sure that there is an environment that allows them to actually, first of all, get in the job force and maintain there. So we look at things such as restrictive social norms that might hold women back from meaningful economic opportunities. We also have to work with employers to recognize, whether it's covert or overt, that there may be business practices that actually disallow women from actually achieving those opportunities. And so this is something we take very, very seriously. So I'm really looking forward to digging more into this in the discussion later, but I just really do want to close and say this. Investing in women's economic empowerment, it is absolutely foundational to all of our development goals across USAID. I cannot overestimate that when women are economically empowered, they absolutely are reinvesting in their families, they're reinvesting in their communities, and this multiplier effect spurs economic growth, and it frankly contributes to global peace and stability. We were really proud when the president made women's economic empowerment a feature in his national security strategy, and through WGDP, we're really trying to build on this to show those linkages between women's economic empowerment and global prosperity as well as stability. So in closing, simply put, we can't not invest in this sphere. It is absolutely the right thing to do, and it's actually the smart thing to do. So thank you, Brett. Thanks again for bringing us here today, and I'm really looking forward to a robust conversation.
Sure. I'm really glad that you mentioned property rights. As you know, the Heritage Foundation has an annual index of economic freedom, and one of our big areas of analysis in that index is property rights. So we think that that is fundamental not only for development in general, but for women's development as well. So I'm glad to see that that's a big part of the WGDP index, the W-GDP Initiative, and Pillar 3. One thing I wanted you to ask you to sort of maybe conclude here is, it's one thing to talk about, as you mentioned, adopting laws, you want to see implementation. So how are you measuring the impact overall in terms of progress, moving from point A to point B, or helping countries actually prove that they've done the things that they have committed to do?
First of all, thank you for your own work at Heritage on leading really this charge on property rights. It is, as I said earlier, so fundamental to everything we're doing. And I'm glad you're asking about measuring impact. You know, this is something, especially I think of in my former life as someone who was a grantee of U.S. government funds. You know, anytime we're looking at the taxpayer dollars that have so generously been provided to any of us, we need to make sure that we're using them efficiently, and we need to make sure that those investments are effective. And we take that very seriously at USAID. So a couple points to that, how we've thought about that, right? Because in all of our programs under WGDP, first of all, we need to be doing two things. We need to be making sure, one, that we've correctly identified what the problem is. So we've created what we call a WGDP learning agenda. And this really was to make sure that we are accurately, investing in programs and activities that are based on evidence, right? So we look at the gaps. Through the learning agenda, what we first have to do is do an assessment, frankly, of what are the gaps. What are the issues? What are the barriers that are facing women under a specific pillar? And then what we do is we identify what are the accelerators to combating and overcoming that barrier. How can we most effectively and efficiently meet that challenge, meet that gap? And so that's been really important to us. The second thing we've done, so not only are we analyzing and assessing the data in our own programs, but what we've also recognized we have to do is we need other stakeholders at the table. This is not something that one agency or one government can do in sort of a vacuum. So we've created a WGDP community practice, and for those of you outside the bureaucracy, that's what we call USAID Speak, for a key group of stakeholders who come together around an issue. And through the WGDP community of practice, what we're doing is increasing collaboration among the US government, as well as the private sector and the civil society. We recognize that if I look at these three groups, we all have a very important role to play, right? The private sector is the one creating the jobs. The governments, both the US as well as overseas, we're the ones looking at that regulatory framework and how we can change and implement laws. And often, most importantly, the civil society is really making sure that we have the local buy-in and the advocates to make sure that this isn't just an idea, let's say, coming out of the United States, but it's really tapping into our partners in each country who are really at the ground, on the ground at the grassroots level, advocating for this change and working and learning from them. So when we look at that, and then the final thing I would say is we really look at monitoring and evaluation. We have indicators we use across all of our programs to ensure that we are meeting the goals under WGDP and the framework for monitoring and evaluation that they have set out. And then finally, we evaluate and make this information and these results public, because we really want to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments, and we look forward to having you join us on screen again during the Q&A portion of the event at the end.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, I want to invite Laura Smith to turn on her webcam and join me on the screen. Laura Smith serves as the Chief of Staff at the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Previously, Laura was in the White House Office of the Chief of Staff as Assistant to the Senior Advisor. Before joining the White House, she was the Deputy Communications and Digital Director for the California Republican Party, where she oversaw implementation of the party's digital strategy. Laura, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Brett, and thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you to the Heritage Foundation for hosting today. I'm thrilled to be here with everybody. Let me also just say thank you to the other panelists who are joining today. As Michelle and Ambassador Curry so accurately said, I'm honored to be here today and proud to share the virtual stage with so many intelligent, driven women that are leading such important work for this administration. MCC is grateful to Ivanka for her leadership and to the White House team, Ambassador Curry and her team at State, the team at USAID, Michelle and Acting Administrator Barza for their support and engagement, and of course to DFC and Charity. MCC is a proud partner of the interagency effort around W-GDP. And I would also be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank our own teams at MCC. We are grateful for their work and for their contributions. They continue to champion these efforts and ensure that our work in this space is having an impact around the world. They're also very excited, as we all are, about yesterday's announcement that MCC is an awardee of the W-GDP Interagency Fund and will be working with the government of Cote d'Ivoire to establish a women's data lab that will help support women entrepreneurs with technology and training. For MCC, women's economic empowerment has been integral to our program since the agency's inception. And now the Trump administration, through the W-GDP Initiative, has built a venue for prioritizing and consolidating the US government's efforts in this area. Not an easy lift, but certainly it has provided MCC with a clear framework and the support needed, and not only achieving the goals and implementing the changes that we've set out, but also in holding our country partners accountable to deliver on these as well. Our singular focus at MCC, which you know well, Brett, as do many others, is reducing poverty through economic growth. And W-GDP aligns with this perfectly. It prioritizes the critical role that women play in driving economic success and stability in nations around the world, which of course includes our partner countries at MCC. MCC's model is rooted in evidence-based decision-making, that is, we follow the data. Because women's economic empowerment is fundamental to our mission, our rigorous analysis of gender inequalities informs the life cycle of our investments, from the selection of country partners through program design to implementation. For example, MCC's board of directors selects our partner countries based on performance across 20 independent indicators, including the gender in the economy indicator, which draws on each of the 5 areas that are emphasized in Pillar 3 of W-GDP. Once a partner country is selected, MCC identifies the constraints to that country's economic growth to help guide the design of that investment. This includes an analysis of barriers, legal, regulatory, and cultural, that would hinder women from participating in or benefiting from economic opportunities that are generated by growth. Under the leadership of our current CEO, Sean Cairncross, MCC also has recently added women's economic empowerment to our investment criteria, a first for the agency, to further advance W-GDP and to direct our teams at MCC to further prioritize women's economic empowerment in developing and implementing our projects. Let me say that W-GDP and the team at State and the White House and across the interagency has been very supportive in making a direct and immediate impact within MCC's partner countries. We were thrilled to travel to Morocco with Advisor Trump last November, where Sean and Ivanka were able to promote the government of Morocco's adoption of legal reforms that strengthen women's ability to own and to inherit land, which speaks directly to Pillar 3 of W-GDP, as Ambassador Curry had mentioned earlier. One of those reforms removes legal barriers that women had previously faced, recognizing the rights of all heirs, including daughters, to hold land titles. MCC actively works with partner governments on regulatory reforms, including the removal of restrictions on women's employment and otherwise that impacts their ability to enter and succeed in non-traditional sectors. In Ghana, for example, the energy utility sector recently adopted an MCC-supported policy to encourage the hiring, retention, and promotion of qualified women within the utility. This is coupled with efforts to create a better workplace environment for the women who work there. These are just a few ways that I wanted to share with you in my introductory remarks that we're working with our partner countries to increase economic opportunities for women through legal and regulatory reforms. We aim to maximize impact by not only providing the necessary infrastructure to support economic development, but also by leveraging these investments to bring about further reforms, which will ensure sustainability and long-term growth for the country. Of course, we then come full circle, and the data is clear, which I think Michelle talked about very well. Women's economic participation is certainly critical to sustainable economic growth. And we all know that when women participate in the economy, household incomes increase, businesses grow, and stronger economies emerge and certainly endure. At MCC, we're proud that our programs contribute to Pillar 3. These reforms are perhaps some of the most difficult to achieve, but the impact is powerful and promotes democratic and free market principles around the world. We look forward to our continued partnership with W-GDP and certainly the whole of government's effort to improve the lives of at least 50 million women around the world. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Brett.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. I'm kind of curious. MCC is a much more narrow approach to U.S. foreign assistance because they have countries that are eligible based on specific criteria and a specific process. So it's not as if you can just go into a random country and identify a women's initiative that you would like to support. It has to be in a country that's eligible for MCC assistance. So how exactly are you working in those countries or that narrow subset of countries to advance this program while staying consistent with your own methodology, I suppose would be a way of putting it?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for that question. You know, I think that MCC, I completely agree with you. I think we have a very unique role to play in the US, certainly development toolkit, but more specifically within the W-GDP initiative. I think that our contributions to W-GDP, all to say, certainly reflect that as well. There are so many, the reason I'm hesitating is that there are so many great examples throughout our investments around the world of women whose lives, whose families, whose communities and countries have been positively impacted by MCC's work. We, as you know, create programs to support and train women, provide opportunities to women, to entrepreneurs, business owners, landowners, farmers, the list goes on. But I think that most relevant to your question, there's a couple of pieces that I would like to hit on, but our role is most unique because we leverage reforms using a model of accountability. So we are able to leverage real and often incredibly difficult change before even spending a dollar within the country. And like I said, we certainly do this by holding our partner countries accountable. But one of the best things about the design of the agency is that we are not afraid to walk away from the table if a country is not willing to make or spend the political capital to invest in the necessary reforms that go along with hard infrastructure. And so I think that that's one part of your question, but you are right that our country partners are required to go through quite an intensive selection process. And in fact, we find that Côte d'Ivoire and others have also used MCC's scorecard as a roadmap to even qualify for selection. But I think what we find and why we appreciate so much this initiative is that it sort of strikes that that balance for MCC between decisions that we make are data driven, and it is clear that women need to be directly invested in, but this is a new frontier, right? And it's something that's we know it's the right thing to do. We know that economies can't succeed without directly investing in women. And so we very much look to our country counterparts to recognize that as well. All to say that meet the scorecard, qualify for the programming. Let's work together to make sure that you're implementing the reforms that are necessary to ensure that we're sticking to the model while investing in women.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Laura. Thank you, and we'll also ask you to come back during the Q&A portion and be on screen with me.
Thanks so much, Brett.
Thanks. Finally, I want to invite Charity Wallace to turn on her webcam and join me on screen. Charity serves as the Managing Director of Global Women's Issues at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Prior to assuming her current position, Charity served as the founder and president of Wallace Global Impact, and before that was the founding vice president of Global Women's Initiatives at the Bush Institute, serving as a senior advisor and chief of staff to Mrs. Laura Bush. Charity, thanks so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. And just looking forward to hearing the role or the how the DFC is contributing to the W-GDP Initiative.
Well, thank you so much, Brett, and to Heritage for hosting all of us today. It's a really important topic, and I'm thrilled to join this really distinguished panel of women who I consider friends and strong colleagues, leaders in this area, and just to really be able to have the opportunity to discuss the critical work that the WGDP is undertaking to promote enabling environments through Pillar 3 and to promote women's economic empowerment. It's been, a very exciting week for WGDP. Last week, the DFC hosted our WGDP 2X America's Investing in the Future of Women conference, at which advisor Ivanka Trump announced the DFC's new commitment to mobilize $6 billion over the next 3 years to gender smart investments. And then, of course, yesterday there was the incredible event hosted at the State Department to celebrate the success of WGDP. Those 12 million women reached with that goal towards 50 million, and to announce the Pillar 3 action plan. So we're just so proud to be a part of this whole of government effort to empower women. As probably most of you know, the DFC is America's development finance bank. So we partner with the private sector to bring economic prosperity and stability to emerging markets around the world. We have projects in over 100 countries where we aim to infuse private sector solutions to some of the world's largest development challenges. We invest in commercial projects to drive economic growth. So our portfolio spreads across a broad range of industries, and we utilize a number of specific tools and products for our investments. So, those include debt and equity. It includes political risk insurance, and of course, technical assistance is now part of our portfolio. So we lead the private sector capital where it otherwise wouldn't go in order to achieve better development outcomes and economic prosperity. And as all of my distinguished colleagues have already said, we know that if we want to achieve goals of economic prosperity and stability, that we can't really do that unless we empower women. So we always say, arguably, the biggest missed market opportunity is that of women. McKinsey Global Institute found that eliminating gender disparities in employment, sector, wages, and credit would add an additional $12 to $28 trillion to the global GDP by 2025. Women are economic drivers, and we know, as has been said, that when we invest in women, we improve outcomes for families, we strengthen communities, and countries are more prosperous and stable. In March of 2018, the 2X Initiative's Women's Initiative was launched at then OPIC, now DFC, with commitments to mobilize $1 billion in 5 years, so over 5 years, to gender smart investments. So those are women-owned, women-led, and women-supporting businesses. And when I started this past March as the managing director for our global women's issues, I learned one of the most astonishing facts, which is that when 2X was launched at OPIC, the commitment to mobilize $1 billion towards gender-smart investments, there were only 4 deals in our pipeline that would have met 2X eligibility. But when OPIC applied that intentionality and specific criteria around investing in women's economic empowerment, it surpassed the initial goal within the first year. To date, DFC has closed on 95 2X deals, and we have 106 in our pipeline. And we've mobilized over $3 billion towards gender-smart investments. And that all is in support of the WGDP. It's been that intentionality that has enabled the DFC to meet these milestones. And really, that's what's exciting about the WGDP whole of government effort. WGDP was launched around 3 specific pillars, as was described by Ambassador Curry and Michelle, and has made really enormous strides towards empowering women economically by having clarity around the objectives and utilizing the strengths and distinctive roles of each of the 10 interagency partners. So we're bringing all of our unique resources and influences to bear. And that's how we're able to, and we are moving the needle for women. From an economic perspective, if we remove those 5 restrictions that are outlined in Pillar 3, and that Pillar 3 specifically addresses, so again, it's accessing institutions, building credit, owning and managing property, traveling freely, and then removing restrictions on employment. This has been said, but it would result in an increase in GDP of up to 7.7 trillion or 8.3%.
I was just curious because the role of the Development Finance Corporation isn't so much about legal change or institutional change. It's about facilitating investment in developing countries.
Right.
And so what unique role do you see the DFC providing in terms of Pillar 3, in terms of the WGDP initiative? How do you see your comparative advantage in this whole of government process here?
Absolutely. So we recognize that we have a specific and limited tool, namely that of finance. But we believe that finance is one of the most powerful levers to create behavioral and systemic change, which is actually what has to happen in this particular area. We're partnering with State Department, MCC, USAID, and the other interagency partners, as well as our private sector clients on the ground, to use our financial tools as a device to negotiate the changes in laws. So really what we're aiming to do is package our financing in specific countries to use it as leverage in advocating for legal change. So in order to foster an environment for female borrowers and to ensure that female borrowers are enabled and empowered to build thriving businesses, we know and recognize that inhibitive laws, particularly in certain countries, must be changed. So one of the ways that we're doing that is our CEO, Adam Bowler, often uses DFC's influence, so our financial tools, our investments, our private sector partners, as an incentive to change laws that are restrictive, or prohibitive for women from fully participating in the economy. So we use our scaling capabilities and partnerships to promote those changes. And, as part of the holistic WGDP strategy to leverage each one of our tools, we're really working to collaborate creatively and strongly with our interagency partners. So, for instance, we hope to provide specific financial tools that can be used by our partners at state, like U.S. ambassadors or within the WGDP office. With MCC, we're providing additional devices and to enhance their really outstanding work that Laura discussed. And then we're working with, in collaboration with USAID, to serve what we think of as the missing middle by utilizing blended finance models to more effectively reach underserved businesses and underserved women. So by serving that missing middle through the blended finance mechanism, we will be better able to equip and identify and address the social, cultural, and of course legal barriers that are limiting women entrepreneurs from reaching scale. So, I mean, what I can say is we're just really proud of the work of WGDP. We're proud to partner across the interagency to bring our collective strength and power to ensuring that more women are economically empowered around the world. And so that's why I'm just so thrilled to be here today and with these incredible women to talk about this great work.
Thank you so much, Charity, for being with us. If we could have all the panelists turn their cameras on and their audio on, so we'll be turning to the Q&A portion of the event today. First, I want to thank you for coming here today to the Heritage Foundation, to coming on and giving your presentation, giving us all this great information about what your agencies are doing in terms of the W-GDP Initiative, and for being willing to field some questions from our audience today. Second, I want to thank our audience and our viewers for signing in today to our webinar. Now is their chance to participate in this conversation, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they have to ask you. As a reminder, you can submit your questions in the chat box onto the, well, depending on where you put it on your screen. I have it in my lower left-hand side. But if you want me to ask your question, please let me know your name and the organization that you're affiliated with so we can identify who is the questioner here. Today, the first question that we have comes from Edgar Villanueva from the U.S. Guatemala Business Council, and he has a question for Ambassador Curry or Assistant Administrator Beckering. He notes that we are starting to see positive dynamics aimed at economically empowering women and indigenous women in Guatemala and in Central America. For instance, the DFC recently approved a $200 million loan to one of our members, Banco Industrial, and 30% of the funds are exclusively for small and medium enterprises owned by women and indigenous women. Following this dynamic, he wants to know, where do we begin to structure a U.S., Guatemala, or Central America bilateral economic agenda that includes these important issues? And second, what role do you believe the regional private sector can play in raising the profile of women's economic empowerment in leading this structured economic agenda?
Yeah, I can take a little bit of that. It's actually already underway. Like, I know, for instance, that our Advancing Women Entrepreneurs, the AWE program that I mentioned in my earlier remarks, is very active in Guatemala, and we've already seen the impact of it. And we just recently received a report from our embassy there detailing how the most recent class of graduates from that program has experienced a higher degree of economic opportunity. They've been able to start businesses even during the past 6 months. We've seen them be able to build successful businesses and keep them going, and that it has discouraged them from seeking to migrate to the United States and allowed them to stay in Guatemala, build a business, protect their families, and actually contribute to the country there and contribute to its growth and its prosperity and its peacefulness. So we see this already as part of what we're doing in Guatemala. It's an essential part of our approach to the whole region, in fact, that as Michelle said, we are looking to help countries on their journey to self-reliance. This is such an essential part of it. And we know that especially as we look at some of the challenges that we face with this particular region, we really need to create growth and opportunity on the ground, and empowering women to be able to do that is 100% essential. So it's already baked into the cake, and I know my colleagues can talk about more specifics there.
Yeah, let me join in here. First of all, thank you for the question. And that's an area where we're really proud to work in. And I want to actually start out and say that yesterday, on Monday, was a really exciting day at USAID because we actually launched our first ever Indigenous Peoples Policy. And so, Edward, to get to your original point, this is something, that we all take so seriously, right? Because we recognize we really have to focus on the most marginalized of all groups. And oftentimes in our women's economic empowerment work, we see that as the Indigenous groups. And so they have to be our partners. One of the things I would just like to draw your attention to, just to give you you an example of our work. So through USAID, we work really closely on these issues, specifically with our partners through our missions. And I know our work in Guatemala and in the region has been really strong. And I would just draw your attention, we're really proud that actually through our new partnership initiative, we've just launched a $10 million opportunity that's really seeking to increase women's economic empowerment in conflict prevention as well as recovery activities. And so that's going to focus on women's economic empowerment. And we have specifically tailored this opportunity to at-risk and marginalized women in Guatemala, Mexico, and Honduras. And so through this opportunity, we're really looking at working with them on job creation, workforce and vocational training, as well as access to capital. And the whole idea through our new partnership initiative is to really make sure we are getting to that grassroots of working with new partners and making sure that all of USAID's funding and opportunities are frankly available to all people. So we're really excited about that and look forward to having some results to maybe share with you the next time Heritage has us come back to talk about this issue.
Well, you guys are always welcome. The next question it looks like it's a question generally to the panel. So whoever would like to respond to it. It's from Fiora Okereke from Reynolds America. And let me just apologize now for any kind of mispronunciations or any kind of maybe misrepresentations of your questions that I have. I'm doing my best on reading these things. But her question would be, she would like to know how the private sector can get actively involved. Who do we contact? How does that partnership work?
I'd love to start with that, and obviously Charity will have a lot to say about that, and she's mentioned some of already DFC's efforts there. So the private sector, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I mean, they have to be our partner, right? So the private sector is really where jobs are being created, right? And we're helping in our role in enabling. So through the W-GDP fund, from day one, we have prioritized opportunities that involved the private sector as an equal partner. And so let me just give an example. So yesterday during the event, and you can see this through the press releases and fact sheets we sent out, we really highlighted specifically a lot of the US and other multinational corporations that we've already partnered with in the last year and a half. So let me give you an example. We're looking specifically with companies like Walmart. So how do we, and Guatemala is actually another good country example here of where we've worked with a Walmart. How do we bring more women entrepreneurs and business owners into global supply chains, right? This isn't so easy, right? It involves, first of all, the private sector, being willing to contract with these women entrepreneurs, but it also requires a lot of work on our side to make sure that women entrepreneurs have, frankly, the capacity, the networks, the know-how, how to actually bridge that gap into going from a small business to, let's say, a business that has access. So we were really proud yesterday. One of the announcements was our new partnership with WeConnect. And many of you probably on this call have worked with WeConnect, led by Elizabeth Vasquez. This is really working specifically with these partners. I know Kiva is part of this, CARE, et cetera. And what we're looking at is how do we make that linkage to the global supply chain? So I would, and I'd be happy to provide more information, but that's one that we are really proud of. And then another thing I would note is our work with Pepsi. Through all of our work, so with Pepsi, we've started a new opportunity in India. And what we're really looking at is bringing women farmers into the global supply chain. And again, when we do these private sector partnerships, and I'm speaking now directly to you if you're part of a private sector and you're on this call, what our new private sector engagement policy at USAID focuses on is really marrying our core strengths and capabilities, right? So for example, in India, where USAID came to the table in this project was working with women farmers to get access to property rights for their land so they could actually go into contracts and be partners with Pepsi in their agricultural supply chain, right? And so we're looking at, in that case, Pepsi came to the table. They had a business case model. They could help women's economic empowerment by bringing more women into the supply chains. And we helped by making sure women were actually had the ability to actually, enter into those contracts by working with the local government to make sure that there was the legal access to land. This is something I could go on about all day. I actually oversee private sector engagement for USAID. And so if you have questions about this, and I don't know if I can put in the text box, but simply reach out to us. We have an entire dedicated team at USAID who works on global partnerships. And again, it's a true partnership. So we don't have anything set in stone. It's not a one size fits all model. It's really, you and us sitting down literally at a table and saying, what do both of us bring to the table? Where are you working? Where are we working? And let's make this a true partnership.
Thank you, Michelle. And Charity, your entire institution is dedicated to partnering with the private sector, so I'm sure you have a lot to say.
No, absolutely. And thanks for the question. And, it's just so great to hear how each one of our agencies is really looking at these public-private partnerships. It's very critical to the work specifically for women around the world. As we've looked at all the different types of public-private partnerships, those tend to move the needle the most. And as you said, DFC really does work primarily with the private sector. We catalyze their strengths, their co-investments with us. We co-create opportunities. And the way in which we look at gender smart investments, it's been integrated into the entirety of the DFC. So our office actually sits and works with each of the business lines and have the opportunity, again, to pull in all this private sector solutions and dollars in order to enhance and mobilize the work that we're doing. So the DFC will come along and invest. Banco Industrial is a great example. We just provided an investment to them. And as part of that, to meet our 2X criteria, which is supportive of WGDP, at least 30% of the loans will go to women borrowers, so women who own small, medium enterprises. So that's the way in which we're really bringing in the private sector to catalyze and empower women. There's a lot of ways in which we're doing it. Last week, we also just were able to announce there's a partnership with Microsoft that we're doing, and that's really to close the gender digital divide, which is an enormous issue for women all around the world, particularly in emerging markets. So that's one way that we're developing opportunities with the private sector. We also have a MasterCard partnership we're working in India, and again that has to do with on lending to women borrowers in micro and small medium enterprises that we're able to do with a bank there, but in partnership with MasterCard. So from our perspective, we do it from a number of different ways, and we're always eager to identify new collaborations, new and co-investment opportunities. So go ahead and get on DFC and you can connect with me as well. So I'm happy to take those connections. But Ambassador Curry, I think you were going to say something. I thought maybe.
We take a similar approach as Michelle outlined to try to work with the private sector. We have some having trouble with that word, some specific opportunities through councils such as the U.S. Afghan Women's Council, the U.S. Pakistan Women's Council, that we're working to, where we work with private sector and we have public-private partnerships. But we're also working through our global partnerships office here at the State Department to make sure that we have platforms that are fit to purpose for empowering and expanding and leveraging the capabilities that the private sector bring. Because we can say it over and over again, but it's absolutely critical. The private sector is where the jobs are going to come from. They're not going to be created by as generous as our taxpayers are in terms of providing assistance that allows us to fill gaps and meet some of these technical assistance and other critical needs. The actual economic growth has to come from the private sector, and getting women into that private sector and being able to participate fully in it and having all the tools and access that they need is where we're really super focused.
Maybe we can have some folks from your institutions put in the chat box where they can go, a link to where they can go if they actually want to seek out a partnership with one of your institutions. The next question is from Nicole Robinson at the Heritage Foundation. What a great institution. Her question is for Laura Smith. And she mentions that the Pillar 3 Action Plan references the Millennium Challenge Corporation's partnerships with implementing government agencies. So the MCC partners with eligible countries through compacts or threshold programs that go through a rigorous selection process. And she wants to know, and you mentioned during your comments about how some of the Pillar 3 goals or measurements are already part of your MCC selection process. But is that being formally introduced into the selection process, into the criteria, or is it going to be more informally? And is this going to be just applying to compacts going forward, or are you going to try and adjust them backwards to try and emphasize the Pillar 3 goals in terms of those relationships with countries?
Sure. Thank you, Brett, and thank you, Nicole, for that question. I think so. A couple things that I'd like to touch on. I think first, for the institutional investment criteria, so that's something I think I shared in my initial remarks that that's brand new for the agency, that Sean's very excited about, as are our teams. Similarly, I know we're working very closely with DFC, but we've also just launched one on blended finance as well. But it's it gives our teams a directive to really throughout the life cycle of our programs, from selection, development, implementation, to ensure that women's economic empowerment, and certainly as it relates to Pillar 3, but really WGDP as a whole, to ensure that those elements are being incorporated to the extent possible, really across the board. So I think that that's one piece on the institutional investment or criteria. As far as retroactive, I think Ambassador Curry had talked about this in her remarks for the U.S. government, and then of course I'll speak specifically about MCC, but empowering women economically has always been important to the United States government. It has been it's a part of MCC's design and was a part of MCC when it was built. I think for us and within the Trump administration, the collaboration and the focus of this whole of government effort is the difference is sort of the difference maker for us, I guess, is the best way of expressing that. So I don't want to give the impression that there has been little investment or focus on women within our programs until 2017 or 2018, 19, 20, but that in fact it has, it really accentuates the need to do it better and do it more, and to bring to light what's already been done, and then frankly from an MCC perspective, to emphasize why data should be collected so that we can say this is the difference maker here. Investing in women is, I think Michelle said that, Administrator Barza will speak to this, as does Sean quite frequently, that you cannot have a fully productive economy if you are not investing in women. And so as far as looking backward in MCC's compacts and thresholds, if you will, that's sort of where we rely on those investments most. As far as looking forward or where we currently are, and if I can just speak quite frankly, what's important to us is that these are not seen as just tack on investments to an already existing compact. Whether it focuses on hard infrastructure or policy and institutional reform, women shouldn't be the exception, they should be the rule. And I think that for us moving forward, that's where we're focused, and using this institutional investment criteria in working with this administration and the World Bank and Heritage and Freedom House and other donors and organizations, in ensuring that yes, it's included in the scorecard, but that it is integrated into our programs moving forward. And so I'm happy to talk about, like the Deputy Secretary talked about Samira in Morocco yesterday. There's a lot of great examples in our power utility investment in Ghana. We got to meet Grace Gamby in Malawi, who's a fantastic example. So I hope that answers the question, but that's sort of how MCC is looking at it from 2004 till now, in a nutshell.
Thanks a lot. I'm sorry, Ambassador Curry, you wanted to comment?
I did want to add one small point on this, because I think that as we continue to refine and build on the cooperation and the coordination that we're doing, what we're really trying to do here is, I mean, this is such a transformational effort in so many ways, but it's really about deepening and institutionalizing it into everything we do and making sure that we are, that it's just becomes second nature and it's part of the DNA of everything that our agencies are doing. And so I think that that's that's one point that I do want to make. Then the other, and I think MCC is a good illustration, because they did already have built-in pieces, but linking it up to everything else is what has really made the difference here, I think, and what marks WGDP as an exceptional platform for us. And then the other thing, just on a very specific note, for instance, one of the things that we're going to be doing going forward, the Department of State annually produces human rights reports and about every country, and we are adding this year, for this coming year, a new indicator where we will look at the Pillar 3 laws as part of our reporting, to ensure that we are, that we're helping, and then MCC can then take that and track it back into their programs. And same with DFC, and use it as metrics. So this is also part of our very data-driven approach that all of us are taking and thinking about as we move forward with this, and how we work across and coordinate and support each other through this.
Thank you. The next question is from Charlotte Ponicelli for probably Michelle Beckering at USAID. She mentions that measuring impact is essential and wants to know what the US government has been doing to measure the impact of the Promote program in Afghanistan, 200+ million, and what specifically the program has achieved.
First of all, the question comes from a very good source on this. Charlie was very involved at the State Department, I believe, in the original years of the Office for Global Women's Issues. So thank you for that question. So listen, Afghanistan, a country that we're all very concerned about with women's empowerment and rights and equality across a myriad of sectors. So let's talk about women's economic empowerment. So for those of you who might not be as familiar, Promote was one of our key initiatives where we were really focusing our investments on women's economic empowerment, specifically in Afghanistan. And while that program preceded WGDP, I have to say there were a lot of lessons learned and linkages we used from Promote when we were designing WGDP. So for example, the question that hasn't come up yet, and I'm kind of surprised, is, how do we do work in countries that are seen as more, let's say, restrictive to women's rights writ large, and Afghanistan is often brought up there. So one of the things we've looked at through Promote, and again, I'm going to just kind of build on the lessons learned and segue to WGDP, was first of all recognizing really the myriad of factors it takes to economically empower a woman. What does that look like, right? I think one of the key challenges we've learned over the years is, one, it's not always enough to say, and forgive my phrasing here, butts in seats, right? It's not enough to just say, we have the data, we have the numbers, we have more women, who are in school, or we have more women who have a job. If we don't actually look at what does that education look like, and are they learning? And two, what is that job and what are they earning? So through Promote, one of the big things that we learned and that we have now used in our other programming is this: looking at what are those barriers to women's economic empowerment. So primarily what we learned through that is a lot of the issues are the cultural barriers, right? It may not be that there's not a legal law that allows or prohibits women from doing work in a specific industry. It may actually be, to give an example, that there might not be facilities for women to use, let's say, at the job, or there might be, old laws or regulations that wouldn't allow a woman, as I said earlier, to do a specific type of job in an industry. We see this oftentimes in what we consider traditional male industries, like the utilities industries. So I'm going to give an example from our engendering utilities programs, where again, we've looked at going behind the numbers, and actually the government of Afghanistan and the energy companies the utility companies have actually come to us now to see how we can replicate these lessons learned. So it's really, at the end of the day, looking at larger than the laws and recognizing that the customary barriers are oftentimes playing an outsized role here. So again, with Afghanistan, I think that's been important. I also want to talk a little bit about education, if I can, because I think oftentimes this goes really hand in hand in going back to the specific promote program. So when we looked at promote, we really looked at also how many girls were in school, and of course USAID is really, really proud of our work there. We also recognize that for women, and this is not just about Afghanistan specifically, women in all countries, right, higher education is oftentimes, much like it is here in the United States, right, that's an important platform for accelerating women into these opportunities. So one of the things we looked at is we were able in Afghanistan to increase the number of women enrolled in public universities. And in fact, I believe we increased that from 57 excuse me, I don't want to give the specific number because I'm going off the top of my head here, but I know that that was a key indicator, and I'd be happy to, Charlie, offline with you, provide some more details on that. But we looked at, first of all, how many women are in those universities. We also looked at where schools were to the populace. We do this in every country. It's not just Afghanistan. We can't get girls to school if we find out the schools aren't in, let's say, safe distances. This is an area we're actually working on quite hard in sub-Saharan Africa as well, recognizing that oftentimes parents are really concerned about putting their girls on school buses or walking long distances to work because they're concerned about things such as gender-based violence. So it's not an easy answer because there are so many facets that go into women's economic empowerment. But I do have to say with Afghanistan, we, while it's a country with specific challenges, let me be very clear and say the U.S. government has long, for the last 20 years, really supported women's constitutional gains in Afghanistan. We're not letting up on that. I know Ambassador Curry and I testified on the Hill about 2 weeks ago, specifically about our efforts on women, peace, and security in Afghanistan, and so she can probably weigh in there. But Afghanistan will continue to be a strong program beneficiary of ours.
And may I just comment too, even from the DFC's perspective, Adam was recently in the region and came back, had conversations with Afghans and with our interagency partners. I worked with the U.S. Afghan Women's Council for many years and have just a real heart for the women there, particularly personally. But we're actually really looking to identify opportunities for us to invest in Afghanistan. And part of that has to do with the fact that there have to be stable environments for girls to be able to go to school, for women to be able to continue to work, and not to lose all of the gains that they've made over the last 20 years. So we're all looking at ways in which, from the interagency perspective, that we're able to support and promote the things, stability and safety and enabling environments for women.
And I also just have to add that Charlie was one of the founders of the U.S. Afghan Women's Council, and her work on this has been, I mean, it's been a decade, more than almost 2 decades long project where she's, I can't say enough good things about the work that Charlie and the other members, especially some of the early ones and early supporters like Mrs. Bush, have done with the council. And it's a great model for us to look at private sector engagement, to really look at grassroots and small projects and the impact that small projects can have, especially when they're married up with the larger interventions that AID and others are doing on systems like educational systems and health systems. Having these smaller kind of last mile projects or first mile projects in some cases are really, really critical. So being able to look across the whole landscape of what we're doing with Afghanistan and see where the gaps are and where we need to fill in is a very important piece of what we're doing. And Afghanistan is a key country where that overlap between WGDP and WPS is very, very heavy. So it obviously is a priority country for our office every day across both of the key pillars that we're working on. Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks. It's great to know that you guys have such a good relationship with Charlie. The next question I think is probably it's a pretty broad question, so maybe Ambassador Curry, you can tackle it. It's from Bill Robinson at the Huffington Post, and he says that while he can appreciate helping women in Ghana, Jordan, and other countries, but he wants to know how and where WGDP can help women-owned small businesses in the United States.
Well, we have a number of domestic initiatives that are working on that. And those are being done primarily by the Small Business Administration, the Department of Commerce, and the Labor Department. In fact, we have a whole office at the Department of Labor that works on these issues as well and tracks women's workforce participation and all of the critical data. We've also made sure that we're tracking the COVID response, emergency response by gender, and making sure that we are doing gender disaggregated data there. So we're working very hard domestically. And as I said at the outset, one of the things that we feel puts us in a great position to have WGDP be successful is the incredible example that women here in this country can set, and the incredible economic freedom and opportunity that women have in this country. And is it perfect? And are there areas that we can improve? Absolutely. And that's why the White House has made such a strong commitment to ensuring that women's skills building and workforce participation are growing. And you'll recall that at the beginning, prior to the epidemic, we had some of the highest female labor participation rates that we've ever had in this country. And women the gains for women in workforce participation and salaries across the board nearly were outpacing men heading into the pandemic. And so we do have a powerful example of success here in this country that we can share with others about how they can unlock this incredible potential for peace, growth, and stability and prosperity in their own countries.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for a couple more questions, if that's all right with the panelists. The next question is for Charity or for Michelle, from Rahama Wright from Shea Yalen, a company that focuses on creating jobs with living wages for shea butter producers in Ghana. And she says, one challenge for women face with access to capital is the size of the deal. What is being done to provide gap funding or blended financing to help companies that need to scale before they can access larger sources of funding?
Michelle, do you want to take that from the USAID side? To the point, there are restrictions within the Development Finance Corporation about the size of a transaction. And one of the things that we've really tried to do with our counterparts at USAID is collaborate together to source these smaller deals and encourage them through either grant funding or early stage funding to get them to be DFC ready. And that's our real hope. So we're trying to identify opportunities to provide blended finance and other tools. But Michelle, would you like to speak about all the amazing work that USAID, DIV, and the others at USAID are doing to do this, to approach this issue?
Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you for the question, Rahima. And those of you who might not know Rahima, she has done so much in the country of Ghana to actually help with women's economic empowerment. And I was really pleased to have met her a couple years ago. And Rahima really learned a lot from those conversations. So what you're talking about is what we refer to as the missing middle. Right. And so, one of the things we've looked at USAID, and this has been a growing curve for us, a learning curve, if you will. I think traditionally we had a lot of our economic growth programs really focused on what I would call sort of the economic poverty level, right? So we were looking at microfinance, right? Really, I called it sort of, making sure that really that women in poverty pockets, because of course as a development agency, right, we're really looking at poverty reduction. So our first look was really at making sure women had economic independence and an economic opportunity to really take care of themselves, their children. But then what we found is we were doing a lot of great work on microfinance programs, right, and so many wonderful companies and banks out there helping us with that. And then we had at the other end of the spectrum, what you're referring to is we had women entrepreneurs. They were already, small, medium, and enterprise, let's say, so depending on what statistics you're using for that, a lot of times these were really large companies with, hundreds to thousands of employees. So they were already in the game, and maybe what we were helping them do was much higher, right? It was probably the regulatory, looking at trade restrictions, border patrol policies, et cetera. But what we realized, I was talking to a lot of entrepreneurs out there, was there was that missing middle. And so what we have tried to do is really increase our programming focused on that. So focusing on women going from micro enterprise, which in many countries is one of the largest accelerators to get communities out of poverty, right? And recognizing that what we're doing is capacity building there, because a lot of this has to do with what I would call a lot of our bread and butter work, which is capacity building, right? So first of all, working on sort of the standards. If I can, let me give a great example from the work we were doing with women fisheries in Senegal. So in Senegal, what we recognize is there was a lot of women in the fisheries industry, but what they were doing was more so what we would call sort of the production, right? They were, killing the fish, smoking the fish, the men were catching the fish, the men were running the business, and the women were really doing sort of the processing. What we recognize is we brought together women coalitions and said, you women are already running these processing houses. You're packaging them, you're getting them ready to sell, but you have such a limited market, right? And oftentimes the women weren't really in charge of marketing. They were only doing the processing. So what we did was worked with women's collectives and communities to create actually what would be very close to sort of an industry group to come together and pooled their finances and began to control their own business products. We then came in through our mission in Senegal, which is where, again, all of our work is really being done on the ground, and worked with them to increase their standards. So once they had increased standards, so they knew, let's say, what health regulations were outside of their own border countries, what we do, and again, I used a great example of the We Connect organization earlier. We worked with organizations to say, hey, who's in the global supply chains? And what we're able to do with a different organization is really work with these women fishers in Senegal to connect to European suppliers. And our role, again, was one, making the connection. A part of Pillar 2 in WGDP we don't often talk about is the second part to access to finance, which is access to networks. I cannot overemphasize how important that is to women succeeding as entrepreneurs. Oftentimes women, especially in areas, again, that we would consider traditionally male, like agriculture, don't have the access to networks. And so we work with them on business counseling, on creating networks, and getting them into the global supply chain. So the missing middle is important. And frankly, it's where we have to invest a lot of our efforts right now if we want to see them make that bridge.
Thank you so much. And I think I'm going to, I think we have time for one short question, but it's also an opportunity, I think, for Ambassador Curry to put a capstone on the conversation here. And it's from Sayla Naheen. And she wants to know whether women-led NGOs located in the US can join the initiatives, and how do they do that? So how do you partner with women-led NGOs in the United States? And what are your goals in that area?
Well, that is a great question, and we do have a number of domestic partners. I think we've mentioned some of them. We Connect, and we yesterday, and I know this is the Reliance Foundation in India has just come forward as we are open. This is an open door. We are very enthusiastic about making sure that we have a number of stakeholders, a diverse group of stakeholders involved in this, and we really look to the community practice, as Michelle said, to help us and continue to improve and strengthen this program. So I think we've put the information out about how to reach out to our various offices and where to connect with us. But this is a pretty open platform, as they say, and we see it as there's a lot of opportunity. There are plenty of opportunities out there. There are plenty of needs out there, and we're very happy to enter into a conversation with anybody who wants to join us in this transformational effort. It's a huge effort. We've set high goals for ourselves with it. And with 50 million women by 2025 as the goal, we want to exceed that goal actually, and really blow through it and get on to doing more and more. We know that there are so many women out there who they just need that little bit of a nudge, or that little helping hand, that little step up that will take them from the informal sector to the formal sector, from artisan work to something that's more sustainable and better remuneration. So we are really looking at how we help them get that little step up, and we've taken a very, I think, it's very targeted in terms of the focus and what we're trying to do, but in terms of how we go about it, we, I think, have a very ecumenical approach in terms of making sure that every intervention is fit to purpose with the particular communities that we're working with, the countries that we're working with, partners that we're working with. And so it's a really wonderful combination of a very focused, targeted, but large goal, and a very targeted and boutique approach to each intervention.
Thank you so much. And
can I add one thing?
sure.
I got it. I'm sorry. I have to add a plug, and just everything Ambassador Curry said is exactly what we're looking for. And so to provide an actual platform for the NGOs out there who are interested in, and we'll put it in the chat box, that is one of the exact reasons why we created the new partnership initiative. We actually have open calls for groups. They don't have to be women specific, but for business groups, anyone who could mentor or provide or be a resource or a partner to the groups that we're working with overseas. So I would just like to again say, if you're looking for a tangible opportunity as either the private sector or an NGO, please do look at our new partnership initiative, because we really do need your ideas, your innovations, and your experience.
Thanks a lot. And in the chat box, Nicole, who works with us here at the Heritage Foundation, noted that if you're interested in partnering with the WGDP, you can reach out at wgdp@usaid.gov. So if you have any specific questions, that's a place where you can go. So thank you very much, all the panelists. You were great. It was wonderful to have you here today. And it's so wonderful for you to spend so much time with us, running on over 90 minutes now. And thank you for the audience as well for taking the time to join us and for asking such great questions. If you have any other questions or anything, again, reach out to wgdp@usaid. And the webinar will be available online at heritage.org within the next 48 hours. So thank you so much for coming here today, and we really appreciate it.